we can go right ahead and talk about the Suns going up against the Pelicans and Devin Booker's elite performance. The Suns, they ended the game 124-111 against the Pelicans. Kevin Durant played 41 minutes but ended the game with 20 points and 7 rebounds. Devin Booker ended the game with 52 points and 9 assists. Jusuf Nurkic ended the game with 19 points and 19 rebounds. And that was basically it in terms of scoring for the team. Bradley Beal ended up getting 13 points on 5 of 8 from the field, so that was really efficient. It definitely helped, but far from the scoring performances that we're usually used to when seeing or when talking about Bradley Beal. Zion ended the game with 30 points and played 37 minutes. CJ McCollum ended the game with 15 points, and Trey Murphy III, ended the game with 21 points. And again, that was basically all the scoring coming in from the Pelicans. No Brandon Ingram because Brandon Ingram went out with an injury a few games ago. And with this 52-point game coming in from Devin Booker, he now joins Wilt Chamberlain as the only players to end up scoring 50 points against 3 straight times against a consecutive opponent. So 3 straight times in the season, and he scored 50 points against the Pelicans in all of them. And obviously, like, when you have someone who could score like this, it makes your job as a player a lot easier because all you have to do is just give him the ball and get out of the way, create space for him, and allow him to operate. And that's exactly what Phoenix did. And that's exactly what their offense is. Just force Kevin Durant and Devin Booker to run pick and rolls, and whichever shot they can get out of it is going to be the shot that you end up taking. Now, most of the time they end up taking the shot themselves, but Devin Booker has been a much better playmaker this year than he has in previous years. I wasn't really expecting him to play the point guard, but after losing Chris Paul, it sort of made sense that he would assume that role and play the point guard, and so far he's played it relatively well. Being a good scorer ultimately makes you a good playmaker because of all the attention that you draw from the defense, because like multiple teams are trying to sort of double team you and help whenever you drive to the paint, and that just creates a lot of open looks for the rest of the team. And when you're on a team that has Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal, they can't really leave those guys open, otherwise it's going to be an open 3, and chances are they're going to end up making it. So that's sort of the offense that Phoenix is going to run throughout the entire playoffs. They've been running it throughout the regular season as much as they could. Some of the players have been getting injured. Kevin Durant has gotten injured. Devin Booker has also gotten injured. And Bradley Beal just recently got healthy and has been playing consistent games. So what are their playoff hopes looking like? So right now they're in the play-in. They're the 9th seed, I believe. Again, the seedings, they always flip-flop between between like the mid-tier teams, they always like flip-flop between spots. So right now, as I'm looking at the standings, they're 8th in the standings, and they're just 2 games in front of the Lakers. So there's a possibility that they might lose that play-in spot. And if they lose that play-in spot, that might cause a problem going into the playoffs and going later into the rounds, because they might play a matchup that they are not comfortable with, and that could either be the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, or the Oklahoma City Thunder. And with that in mind, there's a lot of different teams that you want to consider facing but probably don't want to face. And when you're Phoenix, I think the team that you want to go up against in the first round of the playoffs would be the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, the reason why I say this is because OKC doesn't have a very, they do have a great rim protector with Chet, but in terms of the culture that they have, I don't really see them as like a team that could make it far compared to Phoenix, where I see them as a team that could easily make it as far as the Western Conference Finals before losing. So a little bit difficult sort of figuring out exactly what their ceiling is at the moment, because it's all dependent on who they play in the first round. If they play against Denver in the first round, that's a matchup that they do not want whatsoever, because there's not really a good enough center on the Phoenix Suns that is able to counter Jokic. And, they do have a good enough guard to counter Jamal Murray, but I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be enough for the rest of this team. And JP Bad in the comments, he said, tight race out in the West. Yes, it is a very tight race going into the West, and we have no idea exactly what team is going to end up taking the 1 seed, what team's going to end up taking the last seed, and if the lowest point they could go is falling out of the 8th seed and reaching it to the 9th seed and needing to play Golden State in the first round. And I think they're going to win in the first round of the play-in if they play against Golden State. And then they'd probably have to play against either, let's look at the teams in the standings right now. Again, they flip-flop. So they look to face either the Kings or the Lakers and the Warriors. So I think the Kings are definitely going to play the Suns in the play-in. Like, that is just going to be a definite thing at this point. And so I feel like Phoenix has a matchup advantage when going against the Kings. Not to mention they also have much more experience than the Kings in the playoffs. So I feel like the experience and the matchups are just going to end up benefiting them more than it would benefit the Kings. And that would be like their lowest point if they were to just fall all the way down to the 9th seed and have to play Golden State, and then immediately after that having to play the Kings. Because after they play the Kings, if they fall down all the way to the 9th seed, then they'd have to hold the 8th seed, which could be a variety of different teams. So again, it's all dependent on which team ends up taking that 1 seed and which team ends up taking the 2nd seed, because they're very, very close. And all 3 teams that are in the 1 through 3 seed in the West, they all have already clinched a playoff spot. So their chances are their starters are going to be much more rested than the Suns starters, which is another problem of the play-in that a lot of teams have addressed recently. It's the fact that they have to play these extra games when in reality it feels like they shouldn't. Because if you're in the 8th seed, it means that you're already like a playoff team. You shouldn't have to play games to like sort of determine where you stand, because you're already in the playoffs. And it's like, that's why a lot of people don't really like the play-in, because there's a few haters out there that think the play-in was just made for, like, you know, to give LeBron a chance to make the playoffs. And I see that logic, but at the same time I don't, because LeBron has to win every game like every other player has to win every game. But again, it does give a chance to the 10th and the 9th seed of making the playoffs, when in reality they probably shouldn't make the playoffs. And that's something that a lot of teams try to avoid now, because now it's like, okay, we're not safe with the 7th seed. We have to go all the way up to the 6th seed to avoid playing these extra games, because playing a lot more games, like, while we harp on these players for not playing enough games, the human body isn't really meant to handle that many games back to back to back. And obviously, if you were to rest before playing a long series against one specific team, you're going to have much more of an advantage, because not only would you be prepping for them while you rest, but you're also not going into every game, or like you're not going into game after game after game constantly playing at 100%. It's a lot of pressure for anyone to be able to withstand and be able to hold up long term. So it makes sense how a lot of these teams, like, they don't really like the idea of a play-in, because it would mean they'd have to play a few more games. And when they already make the playoffs, it's like, why do they even need to play these games? Like, why would the Kings need to play games against the 10th seed when they've already made it into the playoffs and they already have a much better record than the rest of the teams below them? It's a little bit conflicting, but again, all of these new measures, they're put into the game so that way these players can play more games. Because if, let's say, like, it was a few years ago where there was no play-in and this team is in the playoffs right now as we're speaking, there's a chance that, like, they don't even need to play the rest of their starters out for the rest of the season, because they're already in the playoffs and they already have way more wins than the 9th seed. Now, this year, it's a little bit closer, so I can't really use this year as an example, but there have been previous years where it's like the team in the 9th seed or the 10th seed, they have way less wins. Maybe, like, we'll just give them 5 less wins than the team in the 8th seed and the 7th seed. And it would make sense that they wouldn't have a play-in back then, because it's like the gap between those teams is ridiculous. But now, now that that's a possibility, it forces a lot of these players to sort of play a lot more games than they would previously think of playing. Like 5 years ago when the play-in wasn't a thing, players wouldn't even think of starting their players if they already have the 7th seed and the 9th seed is a 5-game difference. Because with how many games are left in the regular season, it doesn't really matter how many games you played. You're already guaranteed a playoff spot. And it affects the clinches as well. Like, teams are clinching the playoffs a lot later than they normally would, and that's a result of the play-in tournament. So with Phoenix, again, it's all dependent on their matchup. So if they face the Thunder, I think they have the best chances of winning. If they face the Timberwolves, however, I'm not entirely sure what their chances would be. I do think they have much more of an advantage now, considering how Karl Anthony Towns isn't in the lineup and is injured. So I think they could deal with playing the Timberwolves. It would be a 6-game series at least, but they would be able to deal with the Timberwolves. It's the Denver Nuggets that's really scaring a bunch of opponents, and I feel like that's the matchup that the Suns should worry about the most. But if they look to play the Thunder in the first round, I think they'll be fine. Again, the Thunder, they don't really have that playoff experience. So I think experience in the playoffs outlasts everything else. And with those players having playoff experience, with the Phoenix Suns having playoff experience, I think now is their time, I guess you could say. They do need Bradley Beal, however. Bradley Beal's performances have been up and down. They need him to be on his A game if they want to make it far. And so far, it doesn't really look like he's going to be nearly the same player that he was on Washington. But we'll see going into the playoffs, and we'll see how my prediction sort of lives up. But with that, we are out of time for this second segment. So now I'm going to go into the third segment where I give a quick recap of all the other NBA games that happened last night. So I will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has